It's so good to be here with you today, Carlos. I'm excited to get to meet you and be in conversation with you today. And I'm coming to you and everybody from Houston, Texas, where apparently it's about to snow this weekend, and excited to be able to get into this with you.
Thank you, Elisa. I'm super jazzed for this conversation. It's great to finally meet you in person or virtually. And I'm coming to you from a wintry northern New Jersey, in Montclair, New Jersey. So excited for our time together today.
Yes, and maybe we should start with introductions. Just my name's Elisa Villanueva Beard, and I'm the CEO for Teach for America. I've been in my role since 2015 and have been with the organization, really have grown up with the organization since 1998 when I was a core member, and have been on staff in various roles for nearly 20 years now.
Wow, it's just uncanny, our parallels, right? So I am Carlos Moreno. I am the co-executive director of Big Picture Learning, and I have been with the organization for exactly 19 years and have been in this ED role for also since 2015 and have held a variety of roles during my journey. So it feels like we've been on somewhat parallel tracks.
Yes, and look forward to being able to share a cup of coffee with you when things sort of get back to normal here. Well, I'm excited about the ground that we're going to cover today in our conversation, to really just center on this historic moment in time for education and our students, and what it means for the learning and leadership required. So we are pursuing equity and justice for kids and, for our country. And so really psyched to be able to dig into the content that we're going to cover.
Same here. I'm really excited for it.
Awesome. Maybe we should, you go ahead.
No, I was going to just, I think, again, unscripted, right? So we're just kind of flowing. So I was going to start off just by asking if, a little bit about you and the work that you're doing. And is there something about your own kind of personal and professional upbringing that led you to kind of this place that we're in right now?
Yes. Thank you for asking, Carlos. So, I grew up in South Texas, which is where my story begins. I grew up on the Texas-Mexico border, and my mom came to the United States from Mexico at the age of 17 with a formal 8th grade education. My father's family is also from Mexico. But my mom figured out when she got here that education was a pathway to opportunity. And so much so that she decided, if I'm going to get married, I'm going to pick a man who has a college degree, because she really had convinced herself that if she married a man with a college degree, that her kids' lives would be different. So you can imagine, in my home, my dad is, by the way, awesome, and they've been married for 48 years. And my mom always told us, we're 3 girls and 1 boy, but she told girls, I want to make sure that, you all are self-sufficient and you don't have to depend on anyone to live your full life. And so education is a pathway. So it wasn't a surprise when I ended up in college in the Midwest. I went to a small, really incredible liberal arts school, DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana, which is a world away from McAllen, Texas, and the Texas-Mexico border. And when I got there, I met a new America. I met a white America. I met middle class, upper middle class America. And I was convinced that the hardest part of my adjustment would be that, I was in this new world. And then I came to realize pretty quickly when the classes started, that I was really underprepared for the rigors of college. And the reason that was shocking is because I was that kid, Carlos, that did everything right. I was the kid that got straight A's, top of my class. I was student body president. I was an all-star basketball player. And to then be confronting a reality where I thought I wasn't going to make it. I started to believe I wasn't college material and that this place wasn't for me. So much so that I called my mom a few months into it and told her that I didn't think I was going to make it. And I thought I needed to come home. And she said, with the very strong support of my dad, you're actually not welcome home until you get your degree from DePaul University. You can do it, and you got to keep going. And so for an 18-year-old to hear that, that's deeply struggling, was really difficult. But the only way to get to the other side was to go through it. And so, I just kept going. I learned to ask for help early in my life. My professors were incredible. I did terribly my first semester. I did better my second semester. And then I was thriving. I was just as competitive as anyone else because, of course, I could do it. Of course, I had it in me to do it. And I thought I was going to go be a lawyer. And then I realized I just started to get mad about what had happened to me that first year, and started to ask the questions of, like, who else does this happen to? And how is it possible that kids do everything right? You feel literally lied to. And, and then the challenges that, many don't make it through. And it shouldn't be up to any kid's will or, whatever, to have to push through such a thing. And that's what led me to my passion of working toward educational equity and excellence for all kids. And I found my path through Teach for America. I had a friend in college who joined Teach for America, and I started to realize, oh, wow, this is a group of folks who just reject reality as it is and are so committed to creating a fundamentally different, world for our kids alongside many others, and will tear down walls for kids, whatever it takes. And I wanted to be part of that team. And, we know that this problem is deeply systemic. We know for a fact that all kids have the intelligence. All kids, no matter what, can do it. They just don't have the opportunity. And so many interventions are needed. And what TFA does is we bring leadership to the field, exceptional equity-oriented leaders. We rigorously select, we train, and we support our teachers to go into low-income communities in urban and rural America for at least 2 years. And the idea is that they do whatever it takes to meet the needs of our kids. And in that pursuit, they're also learning about the system. They're learning about their own leadership and developing their leadership to pursue change for the rest of their lives. And we've been up to this for 30 years now. Our network is 65,000 strong, and folks are working within education outside our alums to drive the change, whether it's in government and policy, law and medicine, social entrepreneurship. And what I'm most proud of is that, when you look at our entire alumni base, we have 80% of them literally have committed their lives to working in education or have a career serving a low-income community, when most of us were not on that path. But we met our kids and our hearts and minds changed forever, and we've sort of pursued working to ensure every child has an equal chance in life ever since. So that's my story and sort of how it connects to the work that I do at Teach for America. And what about you?
My goodness, there's so many synergies. Thank you for sharing that, Elisa. A short version, and I'd love to, like, when conditions allow us to kind of be in person, to actually share, more deeply in terms of our journeys. But parent of immigrant, son of immigrant parents from the Caribbean, athlete in college, in high school, played basketball as well. Would love to hoop it up with you at some point. And I knew that, just because of the conditions in which I grew up in and the experiences that I had as a young person growing up in the Bronx, I needed to change my circumstances. And for me, the only path that I knew existed at that time was just leave New York, leave the Bronx, and get a college education and go into business, and not really knowing what that was. And I did that. But in that journey, I was constantly challenged by someone who was a good friend of mine. I need to say his name, Danique Dali, who was, while I was finishing up my undergraduate degrees, he was finishing up his master's in teaching, and used to challenge me around how important it was for more Black and brown brothers to be in education. And I used to give him a hard time because he went to for a prep school, and I didn't go to prep school. And despite he has his own story, which I wasn't listening to, or wasn't trying to hear. I had my own preconceived notions of his journey. And I was just like, you know what, when all young people can have the type of experiences that you had in high school, let me know, and I'll consider going into education. But for now, I'm going to go try to make some money. Long story short, fast forward, after working in business and international nonprofit for a while, we ran into each other. He told me about this school he had been teaching at for a number of years, and it was about to expand, across the country. And he was about to become a principal, and he was so insistent on it, and um, got me to come in and spend a half day in that community and talking with the young people and watching the interactions of the adults with the young people, the ownership that young people had in their and for their learning. And it was unlike anything I had seen. I didn't think it was
Wow.
possible, and started volunteering. And next thing I know, I'm having really deep conversations with my significant other about a career change, and I'm in the classroom the next year. And fast forward 18, 19 years later, here we are.
I love it. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I wanna dig more into that, as you say, when time allows. Maybe,
Mm,
Carlos, what we should do next is maybe like start to talk about what all that means in the context of this
mm,
pandemic and what it means for our kids and our students. And maybe we start with like situating the reality that we're living in right now as a
mm,
reminder to us all. And the truth of the matter is that we're a year into, this pandemic, schools being shut down, nearly a year. We still have 15 to 16 million kids that have access to no devices or connectivity, so are locked out of learning, literally. We have 1 to 3 million kids where we don't know where they are. They're lost because they have engaged with us and schools closed. Half of our kids are still like not learning in school. And we also know that studies are telling us we can expect for our kids to be, have had loss of six months to 12 months. And that
yes.
doesn't even consider where they were coming into this. And then, of course, we know that our kids aren't having the ordinary social interactions. Not all of our kids are in safe environments. And we're watching the spikes in anxiety, depression, and suicide rates for kids under the age of 18. And that's the reality that we're in. And of course, when we say, okay, and who's being impacted the most? Those being impacted the most are, of course, those that, are feeling the effects of COVID, the economic downturn, the longstanding racial inequity and injustice that exists in our communities, which are our kids and our communities of color and kids and communities growing up in low-income communities, right? So we like center in all of that, and then you layer on, so what does this mean for education? And I heard this great metaphor, and tell me if it resonates with you, but it did for me, from a colleague who said, in education, it's like we've been driving on this road, and there's like the road has never worked for us. There's been potholes in the road the entire time. We see shards of glass, nails strewn all around, and we just continue to figure out how to dodge the risks and find parts of the road
Mm,
that make us get faster to make progress. But what's happened with COVID is like our tires have literally imploded, and we're like racing to figure out how do you patch up the tires to get air in them to get the car moving again. And like
yeah.
it's this moment where we're like, we can do that, and the car's just not going to go very far because the road already doesn't work, right? Like the road hasn't worked for a long time for our kids. And so isn't this a moment and a time to just say, what if we invested in a new car, and like a new car that doesn't even need tires? What if we
Mm,
like started to build an entirely new road, and maybe even interrogated, is the current road leading us to the destination we want in a 21st century environment and global society? Is the road built to lead us to the right place? And what if we just came to terms with this education system was built over 100 years ago, different time, different place. It didn't even assume girls and kids of color would be part of the workforce or, public life. And this is a moment to say, what if we responded and reinvented our learning and the leadership development to like get on a fundamentally different trajectory? That's the opportunity here. And there's so many folks doing such great work that have been thinking about this for so long. And you're one of them. You and your organization at Big Picture Learning have been up to this and obsessed with student learning and centering students and the design of schools. So I'm just so excited to learn from you and have you share what does this moment mean and what are you learning as you consider the work ahead?
No, I so appreciate that, and proud to just share a little bit about kind of where we are. So I think we would both agree, and I think there's consensus is around what education should be, and it should prepare young people for life, work, and citizenship. But the question still remains, and often even in our own learner-centered world, is whose life, whose work, and citizenship that is truly in service of who, right? So
Mm,
our schools are charters and they're district schools and serve predominantly any combination of some of these following groups. And I'll use some familiar labels, right? Students of color, students that
mhm.
qualify for free and reduced lunch, English language learners, new arrivals to this beautiful country, students with learning disabilities, and students that are living day in and day out with unaddressed trauma. Now, we like to think about our people as in slightly different ways, right? We talk about our learners as young people who come from incredibly culturally rich communities, caring and loving homes and families, and learners who are brilliant, who are absolutely caring, talented, and all around badasses that are just hungry for a window of opportunity that they just haven't had an opportunity to have. So
Yes.
in terms of the hallmarks of our big picture learning design, I always try to bring in the voices of folks who I think can have just said what we believe so beautifully. And the sister Bell Hooks is just talked about how education at its purest is a practice of freedom, right? And for
Mhm.
us, our form of teaching and learning is deeply engaged, needs to be deeply engaged and exciting for both the teachers and the learners. And when we think about this practice of freedom, you know, you have both parties who are equal players in contributing and sharing in this learning experience, and students who are not just taught information that they're expected to commit to memory and recall when asked, but rather like they learn to think critically in this nonconformist way, right? In an unconfined way. And the
Mhm.
adults in our schools who educate as this practice of freedom teach not only to share information, but to share in this kind of this intellectual jujitsu and like spiritual growth of our babies, right? So, and I think what's beautiful, Elisa, is this that when students are taught in this liberatory kind of way, the lessons that they learn carry over into their lives outside of the classroom as well, right? And that's for us. I think we would agree that's a big purpose of education. And over the years, I've learned that from my, you know, and both of us as work as teachers, as principals, as in my work as a district leader, that we are all born with this insatiable thirst to constantly learn and grow and are changed by our ideas, right? And we're born curious and we're excited when we've discovered new things and concepts. And seen it with my own daughter. I know you've seen it with your beautiful boys. Somehow, somewhere in grade school, learning
Yeah.
like becomes uncool, unexciting, and just straight up boring, right? And then that's when we get into our parental, you know, our parent, teacher, educator mode, right? And I've shared recently that I believe that true equity driven, learner centered education should feel and look like love to educators, right? And when people hear that, they're like, oh my gosh, here goes Carlos on this love talk, right? But when we think about it, like, what does love feel like? Because we've all been in love and hopefully we're in love, right? You bounce between exhilaration and euphoria and increased energy, have some sleeplessness and some loss of appetite, heart, some accelerated breathing, but you also experience some anxiety, right? A little panic and feelings of despair when your like relationship suffers
Mm.
or your plan suffers even the smallest setbacks, right? Because you care so deeply. And that's what it might feel within a big picture learning school that is humming on all cylinders, because that's not how it always is and not how it always feels. But when you see it and you feel it, it's pretty beautiful. Now, in a much more practical way, some of the core elements that, you know, and practices that you will see across our schools is we always begin with paying attention to the whole learner. So focusing on the learner's interests, their passions, their lived experiences, their challenges, knowing their families deeply and their community deeply, And knowing all these things gives us a very different entry point into working with our young people. Um, a one that's a lot more challenging, I think, is that you will see our schools begin our work by focusing on students' strengths and not their deficiencies, right? So providing each learner with that like freedom to develop and grow, and just recognizing their responsibilities and accountabilities to their communities and to themselves and to their families is really a transformational moment in that experience with our with our young people. And it looks like really like young people learning outside in the real world for us, engaging in through their own selection and choice, internships, apprenticeships, shadow days, learning expeditions, all those components, and working and learning alongside adults, um, around really specific areas of interest, like in curiosities for them, while also having that opportunity to learn, explore, expand the possibilities, and begin the process of building their own professional networks and developing social capital, right? Which is for so many of our young people so important. And I'll just say, just kind of lastly around these elements is like, we are just using an archaic set of tools for judging competence in this country. So we need to assign a high value to demonstrations of competence, right? And we talk about knowledge, skills, and dispositions, like in doing so in real world settings and contexts. So broadening and deepening the evidence we will expect, that we will accept, and start to respect regarding learning. So a final and important element that you'll find in our schools is that students can demonstrate learning in different ways, whether it's presentations of learning, exhibitions, student-led conferences with like elementary school students, or portfolio defenses, like any number of different forms where learners can demonstrate their grasp of content. Just these rigorous like assessment methods just employed in true learner-centered schools even take that a step further and show that not only have students grasp concepts, but that they know how to apply it. And then lastly, and relatedly, like with regards to what we're seeing and learning, right? Like during COVID, we have seen standardized testing be completely canceled in some places. My home state, New York State, did it, and it makes you wonder if these assessments can be easily canceled, could we perhaps take the time to reassess how we assess learners and use these tests to improve learning and teaching post-COVID, and remove this kind of high stakes tethered that's tethered to these assessments. And we also continue to hear from educators, students, and families from not just our schools, but also some more conventional schools and systems who are trying to navigate how to innovate and personalize the learning for their young people without being physically in a school building, or with a number of in-person restrictions if they are meeting in person. I know y'all in person in Houston. And there has been a unique opportunity for the spread of the learner-centered approach that focuses more on student interest-based, real-world connected learning. So it's a lot that we're seeing, a lot that we're learning, and I'm sure that's just gonna continue.
Yeah.
And it leads me, Elisa, I'll share just like as a leading question that I totally have for you. Like, we need an urgent approach that addresses the fissures within education, and that begins with conversations and action around racial inequities and how to design and how the design of our school systems have been failing BIPOC students for far too long. So I'd love if you could share maybe just how are you and Teach for America thinking about what's needed right now for your teachings?
Yeah. I mean, you were speaking my language, Carlos. I'm like, everything you said is just like what I think is needed. And it's a moment for us to be like, how do we grab onto this? Because I'm just so struck by, watching our alums who are in classrooms, and our core members in classrooms, but principal system leaders who are leading in the way you're describing. And how do we codify these incredible, pockets of possibility of ways to do work that lead to real results, for kids. I mean, at TFA, and I am just so focused on, we cannot leave a generation behind, which is the conversation right now. Like, we're literally on the brink of leaving an entire generation behind. And when I think about that, as you describe, I think about it on all fronts, right? Our children's mental and emotional wellness that must be addressed with love and with cultural competence, as you described, and also academics, of course, and just overall quality of life. And so I would say top of mind for me are a couple things. The first is, can we just get the basics right from like what our kids need in terms of tools? So we've been talking about the digital divide for decades. There are still 15 million kids that do not have access to devices and to connectivity, as I said earlier. And we're a year into this. It's unacceptable. It's just unacceptable. We've got to just
Absolutely.
resolve it as a country. Let's solve it, you all, because this isn't going away. We live in a digital age. We live in a connected global society, and this is a tool for learning. I've never said this is like the thing, and but this isn't going away. And so this is like how we prepare to go back to school with backpacks and pencils and paper. This goes alongside that list: device and connectivity as for first order business. And then alongside that, like, let's really get our teachers developed on how to become proficient in using this tool so that we're optimizing it as a tool for real learning and possibility. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say, which really is just building off of what you said, is we have to approach this with a humanistic and trauma informed approach to our kids, right? Like, the thing that I'm most worried about is that we see like, oh my gosh, learning loss, remediation, and like the pounding of how we're going to, and the way into this is through kids' interests. As you say, our kids are so disengaged. This is the time to really figure out where they really are, what they're passionate about, that what they want, and that's the way in. And to the point about love, you and I speak the same language, because we actually did a study on this, Carlos, that we studied our teachers that were good in their first year and were good in their second year, and teachers that were good and became great. We had all these theories on what's going to be the lever that makes them great. You know what it is? It's love and relationships. It's when we're able to really see our kids as our very own, that you just go all in. And so that's just a non-negotiable for us as we are approaching our kids. And as our kids come in with, jagged student profiles, there's not going to be a way for us to say, oh, you all are all third graders, here's what we can expect them. No, and so to your point around testing, we do have to figure out how to get information about our kids so that we can be strategic and smart about the interventions. I totally agree on, like, high stakes testing is not the thing to learn to, but how to have a tool where we can empower our kids and our families to know where are our kids academically, where are they on all these dimensions of development, so that, we can really drive and own the learning ahead. The other thing that I will say is, just like we're leaning in with our students, we have to lean in to support our teachers in this moment. The social and emotional wellness that we have to nurture in our kids, we have to nurture in our educators.
Yes.
Our teachers, as everyone has seen now, has access to some kind of, like, what does it mean to be a teacher? It's really hard. And our teachers hold so much. And people try to make these as two different conversations. Like, you're either about students or teachers. Well, we got to be about both, right? This is a mutually reinforcing relationship, and conditions have to exist for students and for teachers to thrive, to be their best selves, to unleash their own creativity and leadership to meet the moment. And the final thing that I will say that's on my mind is, this is not a education problem or that district's problem. This is a community challenge that we all have to lean into, right? Like, the pandemic has shown us our schools do so much. They hold so much together. Our kids come to schools with so many unmet needs, and it's not sustainable or durable for us to say, well, the school has to solve all these problems. Instead, we need an ecosystem of support. All these systems are interconnected. They all play out in the classroom. And so how do we come and orient ourselves as, like, every kid is our kid, and we all have a responsibility to lean into the solutions, creative solutions, to be, community driven in how we support our kids through this moment. And so that's a big thing top of mind for me. And I think prioritizing these actions helps to get us on a path to not only responding, but considering how do we reinvent and do the work differently. And certainly that's what's top of mind as we consider training and supporting our own teachers. And so, and with all of this, Carlos, the thing that's like so top of mind is the leadership required wired to walk through the moment and be able to lean into it. So I'm just so curious this has been a hard year. What are your thoughts on sort of the attributes of leadership that you're leaning into or you're observing are just so critical for us to be able to meet the moment for our country, for our kids, and for our future?
Thanks, Elisa, and definitely we need to get that coffee when we're able to. I mean, I'll say that just my leadership has been, I would say, tested uh, during the past year in ways that I don't think any of us would have imagined being in kind of the state that we're in. And it's reminded me that just the role of a leader is not inherently attached to an overflowing like basin of knowledge. It's not. It's in fact quite the opposite, right? So as I've
Exactly.
started to approach leadership, it is important to accept that there's much required of and expected of me, much required and expected of us. But I also understand that I am constantly learning and growing in ways that impact and shape my approach to leadership. So I am a different leader today than I was a year ago. And this is where I think that just admitting that I don't know what I don't know while bringing with me my lived experiences, those forged whether in the Bronx or in Rhode Island or in Jersey, totally influence how I lead, right? So and acknowledging limitations of knowledge, experience, and a willingness for me to do so publicly is part of my personal journey. And just given all that we have been experiencing, more than ever, leadership matters, as you pointed out, and particularly the breakthrough leadership that I and we advocate for. And rather than just adjust to new norms, we encourage leaders to not settle, but rather push for new forms. And when we talk about new forms, we talk about new forms that recognize the importance of culturally relevant leadership and the importance of Black and Brown students seeing themselves reflected in their teachers and what that means for their success. One of the things I've learned over the years is that creating authentic and deep lasting relationships with young people is at the center of care in leadership.
Yes.
And when we talk about true servant leaders, true
Mhm.
servant leaders know that vision doesn't exist in some far out future, right? Vision is like where you come from each day, and it's how you think, it's how you act. And living the vision means making an intentional effort to achieve goals now and work our mojo to bring the future into the present, which is not easy. And as people that lead or aspire to lead in transformational ways, it's our duty to channel what I call our leadership soul, right? We can call it spirit, essence, or our source. It's the force behind our thoughts. It's the stuff that makes us who we are, and it's like our words and our actions, right? Like, and true servant leaders understand and tap into this inner voice to manifest our vision, our values, and our actions. I listen to that inner voice, and it's more commonly referred to as our character. And Elisa, you and I know, because we've been around the block, character is so critical in youth work because one's true
Mhm.
character, especially in adults, always shows up. And everyone tries to define it, and it's not hard. It's what you choose to do when no one is watching you. So this leadership work that channels this leadership soul calls for a devotion to a practice of, like, for me, it's like self-reflection, ongoing inner growth, awareness, and education. It's just followed by like this consistent action in support of our vision toward this more inclusive world for our babies. And once again, on a more practical level, that work can look like something like being selfless and kind to yourself, right? Recognize that you're your own chief steward. It's about doing the work, right? We got to acquire knowledge, our giving, our influence, and our compassion. It's about creating safe spaces. We have to identify our trusted circles. And when we can, be fully vulnerable in love with abandon. And then we always got to focus on impact. Do the little things.
Yes.
And then I firmly that the successes and the wins and the breakthroughs will come after that. So love to just now, like, this is our first interaction, that I'd love to consider you as part of that inner circle, as I think we're kindred spirits in some ways, and continue to build
Yes.
and become that for one another. So that's some of my theory around leadership and kind of what I think
Yes.
is necessary.
It so resonates, and it's a lot of what's on my mind too, Carlos. And I think
Mm,
I've ended up synthesizing like three things that I'm just like really intentionally focused on, and you literally hit on all of them. I call the first one is spiritual hope, which I've
mm,
really been practicing and leaning into, and I'll describe what that means for a second. And then learning how to stand powerfully in the face of uncertainty is my second one. And then the third is just like centering equity in everything that we do. So on this spiritual hope one, my observation, as you said, is that the most transformational leaders are able to live in this hope and possibility even in the midst of so much challenge, which I too have experienced, as you described. Like, just this last year has been really hard for me, I would say, personally and professionally. And you're able to sort of sustain that hope. And so I've been thinking and leaning a lot into this. And I always carry MLK's words with me, where he says, we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. And so that's always been something that I've carried with me. And I've gotten deeper in this, where I've been learning and studying this teacher and the psychologist named Tara Brock, who gave me the word spiritual hope. She grounds her practices, or her principles come from Buddhist practice, but they really are, they're similarities to many faiths, I would say, and many spiritual paths that you can relate to this. But the essence of spiritual hope is that um, it is centered in not needing the world around you to work the way you need it to be happy. You don't find peace
mm,
in anything because the world around you. Instead, it's like finding this awakening what's within you already, within all of us, that recognizes suffering, but is able to manifest something within you that leads to kindness for yourself and others, love, empathy, compassion. And the idea here is that we all have this within us. And if you believe everyone has that within us, that you can really tap into it. And it's only when you're able to manifest it within yourself that you can manifest it with others. And if you're able to tap into that and others, that in fact it leads to this healing, healing, and community caring for each other, and ultimately leads to freedom and liberation, and allows you to lead. That's only when transformation can happen, where you say educational inequity, we can do that, and you can see the possibility of that. You can radically imagine something different because you're tapped into something within
mm,
you that gives you that strength. And of course, to find that, you got to find your ways to do that. For me, it's praying as a woman of faith, meditating. I like to run, but we all have to do the self-care to be able to tap into that. And to me, that leads to the second one, which is like, how do you stand powerfully in the face of uncertainty? And I feel like I've been talking a lot about that, because as you think about 21st century education, you're like, well, our kids are going to have to be prepared for jobs that we don't even know what they're going to be, and what kind of society is going to exist in 15 years, and pandemics, or is that a new norm, right? And so we constantly talk about, we need to prepare our kids to be adaptable, to be learners, to be curious. But we can't prepare our kids unless we ourselves are demonstrating that. And what this last year has shown is like, there is no playbook. There is no blueprint. There is no linear, like, this will happen, this will happen, this will happen. That instead, it's like really being tuned into our own values, really being tuned into the strength of who we are, and being able to relate to others, work in powerful partnership with others to find solutions, and to get big things done. That's the only way to do it, as we know, and be able to tap into that inner wisdom that we in fact all really do have. And so that's like, learning how to stand in that, I think, is one of the most important capabilities I've been building for myself. And I think that we all really need to be tuned into if we're going to meet the moment. And then the final thing is just equity, right? Like, we talked about how this pandemic, the economic downturn, racial injustice is impacting certain groups differently than others. And so this simply means, like, let's lean into really ensuring that we're meeting our kids where they are. Kids have different needs, not one size all fits all. And so let's do that. And, an example of that very clearly is just, funding of education. When you look at our US school districts right now, the districts serving the largest populations of Black, Latinx, Native students get roughly $1,800 less per student in state and local funding than those districts serving the least amount of students of color. And when we look at just what the needs are, like that doesn't make sense, right? If we're going to actually make sure all of our kids as a country, all of our kids are able to, move through this moment, we're going to have to lean into that and give kids what they need and deal with the, historically marginalized and underserved communities in a way that allows us to do what we need to do. So that's what's on my mind in terms of leadership. And I know we're running out of time, Carlos. I can't believe this has gone by so fast. But maybe we should just end with like a note of hope and of like what's giving us hope, and then we can close it out. Let me go quickly, and then I'm going to hand it off to you to have the last word if that works for you. I'll simply say my hope is manifesting in watching young kids lead in this moment. Just this generation deeply understand systemic inequities in a profound ways and are like leaning into it. I see it in our core members who are teachers. They are just so committed. They are so inspiring. They're dedicated. The way they're approaching their classrooms in rigorous and creative ways, I think, is incredible. And I'm still thinking about Amanda Gorman as like an example of just an incredible leader, national youth poet laureate, who is an activist, and I think moved us all on Inauguration Day in our spirits and showed us what could be. And I think we felt it and believed it. And her quote where she said, "For there is always light, if only we are brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it." And may we continue to let our young people lead and show us our way to equity and justice for a country and a nation. What about you?
Ashe to all of that. I hopeful. I just think this time calls for an increased willingness to continue to challenge our assumptions about the true purpose and function of education in schools, and allowing our hearts and minds to encourage us to believe and reimagine what is possible. And I am filled with hope by the people, students, teachers, leaders, parents, and community members that are continuing to bang on the system in a variety of ways, from like your most subtle to just straight up bringing the ruckus when necessary, right? Like people
Yes.
like yourself, Elisa, and your leadership, and what may continue to be possible for tremendous organizations like TFA. I am hopeful by folks like Kai Henderson and the launching of Reconstruction and that
Yes.
important work that gives me hope. Our newly appointed Secretary of Education, Dr. Miguel Cardona, and some of his early messaging from the nation's capital is giving me hope. And leaders that
Yes.
use their positions and platforms to shine a light on unspoken truths, like Shameful Plug, Pulitzer Prize winner and creator of the 1619 Project. Nicole Hannah-Jones gives me tremendous hope. I'll share
Yeah.
just in the closing, we're honored to just be joining Nicole Hannah-Jones in a one-on-one conversation this Friday, March 12th at 4 p.m. Eastern. For more information, please come to bigpicturelearning.org or go to bigpicture.org. But I am inspired by this conversation, Elisa. I'm sad that it's taken us so long to kind of connect and to meet and engage in a conversation, but I'm excited. I'm happy that it happened, and excited for us
Me
to be
too.
able to hopefully continue this conversation at the next in-person South by Southwest EDU when we have an opportunity and the conditions allow for it.
You got it. Same here, Carlos. Thank you so much. All that you are doing in your organization and just your presence in the world is inspiring. So thank you for the conversation. And again, look forward to being able to get together soon. Thank you.
Likewise. Cuídate.
Yeah.